Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. We have a distinguished speaker who needs little to no introduction. You've met him yesterday, and Mr. President Vicente Fox, former president of Mexico, is here with us, and we're going to have a conversation about a number of issues, some of which you might be already familiar with. And Mr. President, why don't we start there with a familiar issue that you talked about yesterday, which happens to be the U.S. presidential election. We don't have to repeat what has been said, but the one thing I'm curious about, whether you have any regrets about how you initially reacted to the questions about the wall.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for this invitation. We're very, very happy here in this great city, this great country. Let me put a little bit of background because things in the world are moving too fast. And this is also in relation to democracy. The way democracies are operating today, it's very, very different to what we knew before. Today, governments are highly questioned on their delivery to citizens. Political parties are highly criticized and frequently accused of corruption and lack of efficiencies. Ideologies are now becoming a thing of the past, a thing of the 20th century. Today, successful governments are working without a commitment with democracies, more looking for pragmatic, practical delivery to citizens. And all these important changes are causing great doubts. We have cases like we saw in Spain, about 9 months without government because political parties could not agree with each other. We saw the way in 18 months, 2 new parties and 2 kids, very young politicians, come and take 45% of share of the electorate. And when you go to South America, Latin America, Mexico, you see many things going on. And to my impression, that's this new trend that all of a sudden appears in the United States, an outsider, a guy that comes in very critical about the establishment, about government, about Wall Street, about Washington, and he gets to be listened by first thousands, then millions, and then 50 million people that went along with him. So all this for Mexico became a crucial issue. Number one, when we were offended, profoundly offended, we all reacted very strongly against that because we have our pride, because we don't understand why your neighbor, your friend, your partner, which is the relationship between Mexico and the United States, could all of a sudden come so aggressive against ourselves. And so with that, the reaction was immediate. Now, the whole process was a surprise. Today we have, United States has a new president. But I think the process that will happen now is that once you sit in that chair, once you feel the responsibility of governing upon your shoulders, Once you face the need to respond to your citizens, changes occur. His very first speech after he was appointed president is totally different than the language he used all throughout the campaign. So in Mexico, we have to wait and see. Of course, we have to prepare Plan B, and maybe that's why we're here, because also this part of the world is looking for new opportunities, new relationships, and I think that we are about to find ourselves on a very interesting process of working together. This part of the world and Latin America, which is a giant waking, a giant that has over 600 million people, 400 million consumers with purchasing power, a region of the world that generates about 10 trillion US dollars worth of gross product, the third largest region in the world, United States, about 17 trillion, then Europe, about 12, 14 trillion, and then Latin America with 10 trillion. So it's a big region with high potential. I think together with Africa are the two regions of the world that will have the fastest growth and the fastest generation of middle classes, consuming middle classes.
Mr. President, I want to get to Plan B in a moment, but I want to get back to the election only because Mr. Trump and yourself have had something in common in that you sort of broke the mold of politicians in Mexico when you came from the outside, much like Mr. Trump has, to win the presidency in Mexico. I'm going to ask you something slightly different. If you can offer him some advice about how that will work out.
Well, advice number one, calm down. Please calm down. Advice number two, don't lie. And these are things that are totally different in my case. I came from the business world. I was 30 years in business, and then I decided to move into politics because of the challenge we were facing in Mexico about lack of democracy, lack of freedom, authoritarian government. So I decided to jump in. But I started, as I did in the Coca-Cola company, driving a truck, delivering Coca-Cola. I started in politics as a grassroots, working on the very bottom of my political party. Then I became congressman. Then I became governor of my state. Then I became president of Mexico. All that process was a learning process. It's not the same thing to run a business like Trump claims than running a nation. It's not the same thing microeconomic operating in business than macro operating the economy of a country. Absolutely different. So you have to go through a learning process. Now, this guy comes up in 12 months, and all of a sudden he becomes president of the most powerful nation of the world. I wonder where he's going to get the team, who is going to be the Minister of Economy, who is going to be the world relations leader and else. So he's got a tough way ahead, and we'll have to wait and see. In the case of Mexico, we say, okay, let's give him a chance. And let's give him a chance to show his real plans. And finally, The electorate, citizens today, don't have much patience. If this prophet comes in and tells them that they're going to become better income, that they're going to have a job, that they're going to have a school, that they're going to have health and everything that they need, I'm sure in 6 months he will have a lot of pressure and requests on how is it going to happen? What is the delivery? But this is the world today. You have to be competitive. You have to be dynamic. You have to move fast.
Final question on this before we move on to a couple other important issues. Do you think he's going to build that wall?
The wall is built. It's built, let's say, 50%. And it has served no purpose. The relationships in the border at the very end are economic relationships, subject to supply and demand. Migrants, people that move to look for opportunities, have a very special smell. They know pretty well where to go. That's why this very, very incredible, successful place right here, Dubai, attracts so much people because they know there are opportunities here. So migrants don't go just anywhere. And that's what happens with Mexican migrants. Of course, they tend to go north, although they are present everywhere in the world. And they tend to go north because they find the job, because that nation needs 500,000 new workers every year. And so that relationship is subject to supply and demand. And give you one final figure, which is very important. When NAFTA started, this is the trade agreement with the United States, 22 years ago, the gap between income on one side of the border and the other one was tenfold. So you would make $1 on the Mexican side, and by learning how to swim or learning how to jump walls, you would make $10. Who would not be motivated to move from $1 to $10 income? And that's what happens in that border. 22 years after, one generation, now the gap is 5 to 1. So it's still an incentive to move north. But my guess in the next 20 years is going to be the same that United States and Canada. We're going to be on a 1-to-1 relationship. And this is because the intense crossing of that border, back and forth, 1 million people cross that border. Our trade balance between Mexico, United States, and Canada is approaching $1 trillion. So $1 million of $1 million US dollars we trade every year between Mexico, United States, and Canada. And it happens to be a pretty well-balanced trading. We sell half, we buy half, which is very important. So we're not the little guy on the backyard. We're very important and strategic to United States economy. And finally, Mexico has 43 trade agreements. And that's why I think that this part of the world, this region, best option to build the bridge, to start a strong relationship with Latin America is Mexico. Because you, being in Mexico, you have 43 options to move to 43 different economies, starting with United States on that huge trade balance that we have. So the opportunity is right there.
Mr. President, I want to turn now to Mexico and Latin America and ask you some economic questions about the region. But first, let me remind everyone that we'll be taking a few questions soon. So there are some microphones that are in the room. And also, we welcome you to send questions to the app, and we can ask some of those questions as well. Now, in terms of the economy of Latin America, there are some people who say, Mr. President, that there's been few times when things have been going as well as they are in the region economically. And certainly you talked about Mexico earlier. Do you agree?
Yes, we have brights and shadows in Latin America. We have very stable economies, very solid economically speaking, very successful in growing gross product, and we have others that are not performing that well. But altogether, the region, in recent years, once we moved into democracy and we moved into initiatives, innovation, creativity, the region has been growing, was growing, and on the average at 6 and up to 7% a year. Today, it has slowed down, but it's still growing 2–3% a year. We hope things will come better later on. So it's very, very dynamic region with a lot of opportunities. And you have all kinds of opportunities. We have very strong, dynamic growth on infrastructure, highways, ports. That's why I'm very surprised yesterday of hearing how this country, this nation is looking at opportunities in Latin America, especially through logistics, through ports, through energy. And I think that's very attractive in Latin America. Now, economies like Brazil, unfortunately, right now is going through difficult times, as mentioned yesterday. Argentina is moving into coming back to a market economy, open, competitive economy. You have fast-growing economies like Panama, 10% and over, like Colombia and Peru, running at 6–7% today. Mexico's manufacturing structure is impressive. Mexico's manufacturing cluster and capacity is as large as all of Latin America together. And this is because Mexico decided for partnering with the United States and Canada. The southern economies decided to partner with China. And partnering with China was extremely interesting because China growing at 12–14%, 10% a year, was absorbing all the raw materials and food and energy from South America. And they were able to grow at a fast rate. Now, Mexico is right now manufacturing economy, very strong, the most competitive place in the world. Give you an example, our place in Centro, Mexico, a region called the Bajío, is 10 million inhabitants there. We account for 11 huge automobile manufacturing plants. All of them are there. BMW, Volkswagen, Toyota, Honda, Mazda, General Motors, Chrysler, each one of them with 10,000 jobs, direct plus their supplier cluster, up to 50,000 jobs. That is happening there because we are very competitive. Now the aerospace industry is coming into the region, and we're full employment right now in that part of Mexico. So again, I just say that in Latin America, you will find all kinds of opportunities. The challenge is how can we structure, consolidate the exchange between this part of the world and Latin America? How can we have the transportation, the logistics? And that's what this forum is all about. And that's why I thought very convenient that maybe next year we should start something like this in Latin America to connect with the effort here and make it dynamic and make it possible to happen.
Mr. President, I wanted to also, I know you're very, understandably, very bullish on Mexico. But do you think that Mexico can withstand any potential coming threats, whether it includes dramatic changes to NAFTA or any of those, perhaps even paying for a wall? I mean, I mean, for people who are interested in doing business in Mexico and then perhaps are concerned about what might be ahead, if you can speak to those, please.
Mexican economy is very solid, very, very solid. Fundamentals of Mexican economy have been there strong now for 20 years. Interest rates very low, which converge with interest rates in the United States. Inflation rates very low, unemployment rates very low. So the fundamentals are there, and they have been there for 20 years. So it's a very reliable economy. In that sense, we can confront anything that could happen in the case of NAFTA. Now, NAFTA taught us, our economy and our labor and our business minds, to be competitive. Everybody thought when the agreement started that we were going to fail, especially on food, raw materials, and else. And what happened is that we learned to compete. We have become very successful. We have created the human talent that is needed, and now we can move on our own. But it happens to be that you fall in that comfort zone. 85% of the trading of Mexico is done with the United States and Canada. And that's very convenient, comfortable, so we were not challenged to do better or to look for other regions of the world. So maybe this guy Trump has brought to us the best opportunity that we could think of, saying maybe you're not going to have what you had before. So you better start looking for how to move and how to move ahead. And this is exactly the thinking of President Peña right now. And you know, I have to accept that I was very critical with him, but now I have to say he was visionary, because he was the only leader in the world that took the chance of inviting Senor Trump to come to Mexico. And it was very critical for President Peña. But today, he already called Senor Trump, and he told him, okay, congratulations, you made it. It's a surprise to all of us, but you made it. And he asked for a meeting, and they already have an agreement to meet together. So I really think that things will come to be as they always have been, that we will have to work to build a future together. But yes, I think that Mexico right now should look to this part of the world, should start making our trade agreement with Europe more dynamic and more operational. And this can only be opportunities for us.
Well, I want to turn next to the relationship with this part of the world, but before I do so, I cannot help but not ignore that admission that you just made about President Peña Nieto being visionary, given the level of your criticism in previous months. So what I wanted to, I also want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please either raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you, or you can line up at one of the microphones, or send your questions, and I know I'm already getting questions to the app. Now, Mr. President, in terms of looking at, I know you've touched on it in some of your previous answers, the relationship between this region and Mexico, or even more broadly, Latin America. What do you see as the areas of greatest opportunity in that potential relationship?
Well, I think we still, after this meeting, we have to start seriously planning and searching for which are the areas of exchange. Of course, one is tourism. We both have the best places of tourism in the world. We have our Cancun, and we have our Caribbean Sea. You have here this wonderful world of water, sand, and great people and great structure. Tourism, and maybe we should start by putting together Emirates airline to come and fly directly to Mexico. That would be one way of connecting. Yes, it would be sustainable by moving products and by moving people. So one area. Number two, the amount of products you consume here that you don't produce yourself calls for a great opportunity in Latin America as well as in Mexico. We produce what you have here. Raspberries, berries in general, fruits, avocados, all kinds of foods, vegetables. Mexico has become the #1 provider of these products to United States. We provide up to 70% of what they consume, and prices are outstanding. So I see great opportunities there. Number three, energy in all its forms. Mexico is undergoing right now a profound revolution, moving out of a monopoly on the energy resources into open market. The opportunities to invest in oil, in power, in alternative sources of energy is there in Mexico right now. Great opportunity of investment. So there we can exchange. Technology. I think that technology today, information technologies and other areas of technology, cybersecurity and else, with the human talent that we both have, could be a great opportunity. And finally, this logistic thing that was spoken so profoundly yesterday here, Mexico is very weak on logistics. We are so close by crossing that border to United States that we don't have sophisticated logistics and big problems of transportation. So there we have a great opportunity. I launched in my administration this huge port to be developed in the area of Ensenada by Tijuana, which would be a great place to put a logistic place, to bring in a big port, and all of that could be also an opportunity here.
Why do you think it has taken this long for Mexico and whether it's UAE or GCC to see the synergies there between both areas and having that opportunity to connect?
I see it very clearly in the case of Mexico. When you have this mammoth market right by you as a neighbor, United States, we dedicated all of our time right there. Let's not forget that, for instance, California is the 7th largest economy in the world, just the state of California. So Mexico just trading with California is more than enough than we can provide and supply. So we got used to that, unfortunately, and we got used to that comfort, and we didn't look somewhere else around. Usually Latin American nations tell us the same thing. Why are you only looking north and not working with us on the south? And we were absorbed by that economy. But now we have to learn the message out of this new nationalistic trends that we see in Britain, that we see in United States, that we see in other parts of the world. So we need to have diversified markets, and now we're doing it. For this region of the world, I think it's always been visionary. Here leaders and people think on the long term, on the future, and finally discovering that Latin America can bring to this part of the world the growth, the sustainability that it needs. So I think it's natural that we find both of us now sitting together here, and I hope next year we can do this exercise in Mexico and make sure that through follow-up, we can really make things happen.
Let me just ask you, I think there's a question here, and we'll take several questions from the audience, and then I'll also take some questions from the app. Did you have a question, sir?
Hi, it's Simon Baptist from the Economist Intelligence Unit. I'm interested, you had some advice for Trump before. Now, structural reform has been a big thing in Mexico, successful in telecoms, energy, less so in education and some other sectors. But of course, that agenda is now really going to be affected by the new priorities, right? Now that Trump's in place, the government won't be able to pursue the same policies that it did. It will have to focus on mitigating this new kind of threat. How do you think the government's programs will change, and maybe what advice would you have for the current Mexican president about what the priorities should be now for Mexico?
Can you tell me the question?
Okay. And these are priorities for the current Mexican?
Yeah, for the current Mexican government, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, he wants to know what priorities for the current, you think, given everything that's happening in the US with Trump, what should be the priorities for the current Mexican government?
Well, number one is to wait and see, because we're not going to change and move out of what we have built for 25 years and for decades. So we hope things will move along the direction that we have built together, the three nations. And depending on what we see happening, we must have a plan B that we anyway need. I think it's been insisting in Mexico the idea of we should diversify our markets. We're too much dependent on a U.S. economy in trading. We used to be very much dependent on oil and natural resources. But fortunately, NAFTA moved Mexico out of that. Today, Mexico is only 10% dependent on oil, and we used to be 45, 50%. And same thing, I would say that we were very dependent on natural resources, food, minerals, like southern Latin America economies are today. Today, we're very strong in manufacturing, but we're also moving now pretty fast to information technologies, to the new economy, and we begin to see flourishing places like Guadalajara or like Monterrey, that now the economy there is service economy and knowledge economy. So it's overlapping, and I think you have to be constantly moving in this direction. Telecom was not a monopoly as closed as it was energy, but it had to be open, and it today is very open. We have all the big telecom companies operating in Mexico on a very open and competitive atmosphere, and that's also bringing competitiveness to our place. Now, all of this together to say that we must now, on this occasion, start moving our eyes in different directions. And I would say that South Latin America is a very strong market and very attractive for Mexico, and we should work more with them. And as I said, this part of the world and Europe. So we're ready to go. We're strong. We are the 12th largest economy in the world. We are a very strong consumer market today. We're 115 million Mexicans, out of which at least 80 million is middle classes with a strong purchasing power. We have a very strong academic and university system, building the human talent that we need. So it's a matter of time that Mexico will be this nation that we expect. Now, we have obstacles also. Number one, crime, drugs, and violence. We still have quite a lot of that, but it's being brought under control. I am very glad that United States is moving quite fast towards legalizing drug consumption and drug production. In this election that just happened on the 8th of November, 5 states also included on the election whether people would approve legalization, and all 5 of them approved legalizing marijuana now for recreational use. It's been approved on more than 25 states for medical use. And this is the solution, to my understanding, on the crime problem. Because in Mexico, we don't produce drugs significantly. We don't distribute drugs and consume drugs significantly. We're just in between. The huge, the mammoth consumption market in the United States, and those who produce the drug in the South, the Colombias, Venezuelas, Ecuadors, Bolivias. And so Mexico has to get out of this trap. And as I said, I think that the way out is going to be legalizing, and Mexico should move fast in this direction.
Mr. President, we have just a few moments left, but there were several questions on the app by people wondering, do you see a personal role for you in trying to help bridge the gap in trade and other areas between Mexico and the UAE? And one person mentioned, I must add, that in the area of flights from the UAE to Mexico, which you brought up earlier, that there are some restrictions imposed by Mexico to avoid Emirates assuming another aircraft from this area to come to Mexico. Do you see a role for you in helping in any of this?
Okay, let me tell you, we built, Martha and I, my dear wife, the first presidential library equivalent to U.S. presidential libraries outside of the United States. And we built it right there in Mexico, right there in our place. And it is a think tank, it's an academic place, it's a place of leadership. We had 200,000 visitors last year, and with each one of them we worked leadership concepts, and we worked around the idea of promoting public policies. So we do that, and of course we have a strong interest to work with the rest of the world on building bridges instead of walls. That's where we are dedicated to, and I would be most interested in doing that, that kind of work. And number two, in relation to communicating ourselves on the airlines. Number one, Mexico has, if not total open air policies, which is make out of the air industry a competitive industry. So we have all the airlines coming into Mexico. I don't think there would be a problem. I understand there was a problem with Panama. Would not be the case of Mexico, and I think Mexico could be the first place to start putting together that flight. And of course, I'm more than willing to contribute to that with Mexican government, with authorities here. We are always trying to build bridges, Martha and myself, and that's where we dedicate our life to today.
Mr. President, the final question. There are a number of people in the audience who are interested in either everything from visiting Mexico as tourists, investing in Mexico, doing business otherwise in Mexico. what's the final piece of advice you would give the audience about doing business with your beloved Mexico?
Well, that's the philosophy of business, is taking risk, is taking chances, is moving and going to look forth. I can offer to anybody here, number one, to welcome you at our place. We have an international airport. We have this Fox Center, which is an institution dedicated to helping investors to navigate in business environment in Mexico. And number two, that the best first step is to come to meetings like this. And that's why I propose formally that we can put together in our place an equivalent chapter of this Global Business Forum in trying to make sure that it has a follow-up. We can bring in the equivalent business community to sit down. We have a business forum. We just had it in October. 1,500 top executives from Latin America, Mexico, and United States gather to discuss about energy, technology, and manufacturing, and was a great success. But that is not connecting this part of the world. So we would dedicate effort, time to have a strong follow-up on what we're starting to do here.
Well, Mr. President, please join me in thanking President Fox for not only for being here, but for the conversation.